Yo,
Morning.
Sam.
Morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Really good. Yeah, it's lovely here in Nelson today. It's very sunny. It's been super hot. What about Hamilton or the Isles?
Yeah, it's pretty sunny and epic. Yeah, it's wonderful to have a bit of a New Zealand summer. And
Mm.
today we're going to be talking about kind of all the health aspects associated to stress and some of the ideas around triaging and some of the other things we can do to
Yes.
mediate that. Now, I know you've got, as a naturopath, you use these five pillars that you kind of, when you're assessing and managing people. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, so I like to call it the five pillars of health. And because the key thing about chronic stress is that it affects multiple physiological systems. And I mean, there is a focus on neurotransmitter balance, but the downstream effects of that. So I like to look at like the biochemistry, and of course we've touched on the HP axis in our last couple of episodes, but that kind of initial response that we have to stress, and heart rate variability, which is something that we're going to touch on a little bit later, but also the impact on the major monoamines. And when I refer to monoamines, I'm referring to like serotonin and dopamine. And serotonin can be impacted significantly because of the cortisol enzymes that suppress serotonin transportation. So you can get a little bit depressed and anxiety and so forth. And then there's another brain-derived neurotropic factor that is around like the neuroplasticity of the brain. So how my brain can kind of develop and respond and react to life essentially. So that's the first pillar, biochemistry. And then the second pillar is nutrition, and looking at what happens with like high cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline in chronic states, so we're not talking long-term stress here, is that we get altered lipid, glucose, and protein metabolism. So we can find that we have insulin resistance, high cholesterol, breakdown of proteins, so your muscle mass starts to kind of not look as good as it used to, and then of course there's increased demands for B vitamins and magnesium and
So,
zinc,
so
many
your
other.
stress can actually change your muscle composition.
Yes, absolutely. High
Wow.
cortisol, yeah, yeah. And it can cause this increased weight gain, particularly around the abdomen. So it can cause you to, because of this glucose, resistance, insulin resistance, you get this increased fat mass as well. So
This
yeah,
cortisol belly that we see a lot of people.
cortisol belly, yeah, the buzzword, the cortisol belly, and we're all
Mm.
being sold how we can remove this cortisol belly, but it's pretty tricky if you're still under significant stress. And then the third pillar is looking at that kind of emotional health and processing, and how the amygdala, which is like the emotional brain, can get hyperactive, and this is where you start to feel tense and teary and irritated and angry. You get like a reduction in the prefrontal cortex. This is this part here of the brain. And that's like your executive functioning, how you manage things and compartmentalize your life. So you can start to notice that you get, memory starts to get impacted, retaining information, processing information, making decisions. All of those things can become more difficult and challenging. And then we've got this lovely neurotransmitter called GABA, and that's an inhibitory neurotransmitter, and that affects, in its decline, affects anxiety, and so get issues with anxiety and regulation. And then, of course, learning and memory also gets impacted because we've got altered glutamate, and glutamate is like the most abundant neurotransmitter, and it's an excitatory one, but it's also makes GABA. GABA is made from glutamate, which is quite a kind of I don't know what you call it, like a dichotomy in a way, but glutamate's important for it affects signaling and learning and memory. So you
Wow.
start thinking it's really difficult to retain information, or what did I just read, and when I'm studying, what did I just read? I can't remember, I've got to read it again. And then the fourth pillar is like looking at the environment, and um, I think just to go back to the emotional health, like you're going to talk about the triaging around what we can do to support the emotional systems, particularly the amygdala brain. But yeah, the fourth pillar is environment, and really reflecting on like what is your environment, what is your work, are you enjoying your work, does it cause you a lot of stress, what are your relationships, how healthy and robust are your relationships, and what is the cause of your stress? I'm really curious about that with my clients when they're sitting with me in clinic. And then the final pillar is like I'm really interested in this epigenetic response. So why does one person get so stressed and the other person kind of go, that's all right. It is what it is.
Yeah,
Um, and long-term stress, like there's just an abundance of research now. We know that long-term stress impacts on your future stress sensitivity. We know that long-term stress modifies genes that regulate inflammatory responses in the body. We know that long-term stress alters the expression of neurotropic factors, which are proteins that regulate the development and maintenance and survival of neurons in the brain. And then, just on those five pillars, then you can start to kind of join the dots and do what I call like a differential diagnosis, is that, all right, this person's presenting with some immune issues. Is this a consequence of long-term stress? Do they have poor wound healing because of long-term stress? Is their thyroid subclinical thyroid? And what that means is that everything's normal in the bloods, that they're presenting so strongly with some thyroid problems. So we call that like subclinical thyroid problems. Is that stress? Is there autoimmunity flare up because of stress?
right.
Pre-existing conditions can get worse. So yeah, that's kind of how the framework that I like to use. Because yeah, what we do know is that long-term stress does have consequences, and sometimes they're dire consequences.
Yeah.
So I think today we're going to talk about some solutions on those five pillars, and I know that you've got such a passion for heart rate variability in terms of the biochemical pillar. So yeah, over to you on that. Like, yeah, tell us about
So obviously, your heart rate is very simply measured by simply looking at, how many times your heart actually beats per minute. But HRV actually measures the variation between those heartbeats. And, you know, it actually, if you have a very high variation or very low variation, that actually tells you how stressed you are. So it is the variation measures how quickly your body moves from sympathetic nervous system to parasympathetic. So if you think of the sympathetic is your kind of active system. So you're talking about the amygdala earlier. It's like, so if you're stressed, you will activate the amygdala and it will be this fight or flight response. That's the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. That's one half of HRV. And then you've got the other kind of side of it is the parasympathetic, the rest and digest system. So if your HRV is really low, that's a sign you're spending most of your time in sympathetic nervous system. Whereas your HRV is really high, it's a sign that you're really in that kind of rest and digest zone. It shows, it's a measure for you to tell how much are you in recovery? How much does your body actually focus on recovery? And high HRV, it's like it's an indication of improved performance, high adaptability, improved cognition. And I love this little measure because people can track it themselves and they can actually tell, well, how adaptable am I? How am I tracking in my universe? Like, am I in fight or flight all the time? Is my HRV low? Am I easily exhausted? Am I not adaptable? Do I have decreased cognition most of the time? And I mean, there's apps and all kinds of things that people can use to track that. I mean, a lot of devices nowadays, the Apple Watch, the Garmin Watch, they track that. But if you don't have any of that fancy stuff, you can just get an app like Weltery. You just put your finger on it and it just measures, your heart rate variability over a period of time. And you can use an app like Chronometer that actually you can track over time exactly what is happening to your
that.
heart rate variability. And it's very exciting because, oxidative stress really comes into this, which, as and it shows like how constant exposure to the sympathetic nervous system, your cells are under constant stress. And when you have oxidative stress problems, then you get attacked more by free radicals. That then plays further into the stress thing, into more disease. That's why, like, when we stress, we get sick. When we
Mm,
stress, stuff starts to happen. Like, we bump ourselves. Now we have a wound that cannot heal, or we
mm.
suddenly get an autoimmune condition. It's like, so the precursor to all this is something that people can take really control of, is to start to measure your HRV on a daily basis and get a baseline, so you
Yeah,
can actually
right.
see, well, how am I doing? What's happening?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm just thinking, like, from a perspective of like a menstruating woman, for example, it'd be useful to do it over like the duration of your cycle, right? To see
Really?
what happens pre-ovulation, what happens post-ovulation, what happens on a menstruation. I mean, that would be a really useful thing to do, wouldn't it? You're just like, oh, right, my resiliency and my adaptability isn't as hot as it is, like, or as good as it is, like, days 1 to 14. It's not that great from days 23 to menstruation. And
Yeah,
then we can then look at how can I change that? And so then we can look at like the monoamine neurotransmitters, right? Like
yeah.
how, like, we know that serotonin is impacted by biochemistry and stress. So how can we change that? And I guess exercise is one of the key things that, like, I
Big.
just, big
Yeah,
time, isn't it? Big time.
yeah. Big time. And what's interesting with an app like Weltery,
Mhm.
you put your finger over your camera and it measures your actual HRV. But you can go and do an activity and actually measure your HRV just after that. You can actually see, are you the kind of person, after exercise, it's good for you?
Yeah.
Is a nap good for you? Can you do 10 minutes of breathing exercises? What happens to your HRV? So you start to map out your blueprint of what are
Yes.
some of the things that you can do to improve HRV. And I mean, there's studies that show, you know, more eating more calories can improve HRV, getting exercise can improve
Yes.
HRV, having like yoga, sauna,
Yes.
breathing drills, reducing your alcohol, like, and track your HRV after that. Like, maybe that improves your HRV. And you know, if you focus on things, you can work out, what is it that I do
Mm,
that increases my HRV? What makes me get more into rest and digest? Because for some people, we're all individual. Some
mm.
people, it can be more exercise. Some people, it can be a nap and more rest and yoga. And that individualized treatment of stress management is so important. And I know you really feel this, when you look at epigenetics and your kind of work, it's like, we
Yes.
are so different as people. We're the same, but so different.
I know we're wired so similarly, right? But
Mm.
then we've got this genetic blueprint, which we'll come to a little bit later. But as you know, as the fifth pillar. But yeah, it's fascinating that you go, oh wow, like, and what we know about particular genetics that have been researched, in abundance, is that by giving certain nutrients or certain lifestyle factors like exercise, like sleep hygiene, all of those things, like that will impact on your blueprint. And that's where it's just so bespoke. So I'm actually getting quite tickled and quite eager on having one of these HRV things myself. I'm free of anything on my wrist, but I'm going. Maybe I should be asking John for a gift of some sort of maybe one of
Okay.
these Apple watches or Garmin watches, so
Yeah.
that you can start to really get to know yourself better.
Yeah.
No?
And be more empowered, so rather than abdicating responsibility to a practitioner, it's like, well, what's my blueprint? How do
Mm,
you just, track it? And if Weltery is a free app. You don't have to have a special fitness watch or tracker that actually looks at this stuff.
yeah,
You can just put your finger over and it just measures it that way. But it's it's within our control
mm,
to manage our stress better and to work out what makes me fluctuate between that sympathetic versus the rest and digest system.
yeah, 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 yeah. Really interesting. Really interesting.
Mm.
And it'd be useful to do it as well, like if you work, whatever your working week is, but on your days off. So measure it through the week and then measure it on your days off as well. And you can start to probably, like, if you did that over a month, you'd start to see a little bit of a pattern, perhaps,
Yeah.
Cavemen would be looking at us now going, I just can't comprehend any of this.
I know. It's just one of those things. So
yeah, just maybe the second pillar of health is quite nice to move into that now and look at like the nutritional impacts of long-term cortisol and adrenaline and that altered lipid state that I talked about. So, when you're having to run from the tiger, your body's mobilizing glucose, fats, and then protein. So it kind of goes in that order. And depending on what your adipose percentage is to start with, then we've also got to be considering like lipids. Toxins are stored in lipids. So if you've got like an excess of body fat, then what's that going to do to the system as well? Because it's releasing all these lipids into the bloodstream. Your liver's got to process that, your cells have to process that. And then if you've got like quite a toxic lifestyle of excessive alcohol and, stress can really have that impact. And then that oxidative stress that we talked about, oxidative stress causes inflammation. It's just a given, like increase. And if you've got a genetic disposition where your glutathione pathways or your catalase pathways, they're at the top of the pyramid in terms of antioxidants go in the cell, then you're going to get into a pro-inflammatory state. So we like to think of nutrients that we might be looking at. Not one diet fits all, right? So, we've got all these amazing diets now. We've got the carnivore diet, we've got the keto diet, we've got, the Mediterranean diet, we've got the intermittent fasting diet. And I just don't think one size fits all. Again, it just depends on who you are as a person, what you've inherited, what your microbiome is. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about the microbiome on one of our podcasts, but your microbiome has this intelligence, like it's just phenomenal. It constitutes such a large percentage of our DNA it lives in our body, but when you're under chronic amounts of stress, your demand for B vitamins, it goes up exponentially. Your demand for magnesium goes up. Your demand for calcium, your demand for zinc. So all of these, like, and then trace minerals like boron, your demand for amino acids like choline, they all just kind of go up. But I also just want to say that not all B vitamins are equal. So now we have science affording us methylated B vitamins, which are like, this intermediary, they don't need to be converted in the cells, but they don't suit everybody. And so, we've got access to all of these things now, such readily access. And some people can feel awful on B vitamins because they're not the right B vitamins. So that's when it comes to this bespoke, like, let's get to know your system. And that's what I like to do. And I kind of draw the dots and do this differential diagnosis and looking at, they could maybe, like, if they've got this high anxious state or like an obsessive compulsive type nature, then I'd be going, maybe they're not methylating properly. So they might do well on methylated vitamins, but they might not do well on methylated vitamins. So you've really got to look at the picture of the person and go,
and I think what you're saying is so important because so many people are exposed by, marketing, adverts being bombarded and Facebook reels and Instagram reels and, you need this and you need this and you need this. And it doesn't apply to everybody. It doesn't work for everybody.
no, it
and you have to be really careful to also over medicate yourself with a whole bunch of vitamins. Like, great, I'm stressed. Let's just take all the vitamins, like all of them.
Yes.
And, we will do a podcast on the dangers of
Yes.
over prescribing yourself these things and the importance of understanding your own pathways, particularly your methylation pathways, because then okay, I'm stressed. This is what's going to happen to me and my body and my pathway. These are the things I need to do for myself to actually improve my health. Like that's empowerment. Then you're not reliant on, well, I just, somebody on the internet marketed something to me, I'll just take that and hopefully she'll be right. Because
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
necessarily the case.
Not at all, not at all. And even things like your gut health is critical to how you're actually going to be metabolizing these self-prescribed nutrients too. So, somebody who's stressed will go, oh, yeah, no, I've grabbed B vitamins and I grabbed some magnesium. And I'll go, oh, what type of magnesium? And they go, I'm not sure. And there's so many different types of magnesium for so many different things. And so, there's magnesium glycinate, there's magnesium malate, there's magnesium citrate, there's magnesium chelate, and some of those just don't work for some people. And if you've got somebody, for example, who has a diamine, so a histamine intolerance, so that they require diamine oxidase, which is largely produced in the digestive system to break down histamine, they can have certain magnesiums and it actually causes them more problems. So it can cause insomnia. So those are the kind of things that need to really be tailored to a person, particularly when they're under long-term stress. Because let's face it, long-term stress is something that's part of life for some people, right?
Yeah.
And stress does that, goes in and out, in and out, in and out. And, for various reasons, some of us have long-term stress, some of us don't. But yeah, particularly for long-term stress, because it has such a multi-system impact.
Yeah.
And it really does, like we touched on the immune issues, autoimmunity, mental health, digestive system. Like there's not one system that's not impacted by long-term stress.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so just on that, like the third pillar is quite nice to move into, which is that emotional processing and emotional health. And, I'd like to kind of talk about like that triaging that you do in your business with people. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Yeah, so it's really, the health aspects are really great, but for a lot of people, it's what do they do with this thing that comes in? So in previous episode, we were talking about those kind of 4 ideas of trauma, obsession, nuisance, and noise, and kind of like differentiating what type of thing is coming at me. But the thing is, now what do you do with this thing that comes at you? And if you don't have some kind of triaging process, you just like everything that comes at you, you just this reactionary system that must just buffet around. It's like you're in the middle of the ocean and waves are just coming at you. You're going to drown. What is your plan to get ahead of this? What's your actual mission here? So a very simple, there's many different types of triaging mechanisms. And again, I work in a very personalized approach to work out what kind of triaging mechanism each person can use, because it really depends on what their profession is, what type of things like cross their path, what is the balance of nuisance to noise to obsession to trauma. Like that actually influences your mechanism. But a very simple one that kind of applies to most people is simply by looking at something from an urgency versus importance level. And you just say, okay, well, this thing that's coming in, what's urgent and what is important? And a very simple mechanism that you can use is just by evaluating things on urgency versus importance. So whatever's coming in is to just ask yourself the question, well, how urgent and important is this? And then make a little diagram in your head. So things that are kind of not urgent and not important are things that you can just kind of delete. And it's weird. Like when I work with a lot of people, they're like, but I must answer every email. And I'm like, but you're really stressed right now. Do you really need to answer every single email? Like, could you actually just delete some emails? Oh, that would be incredible. So certain things that come in that can just be deleted, like social media, watching TV, eating lots of junk food, that kind of thing. It's like just delete certain things that are actually not urgent, not important. And then you have the next mechanism where you can sort of look at things like that are not important, but they're urgent. So somebody else is throwing something at you. Can you postpone? Can you delay? Can you delegate these items? Can you schedule them in for later? Things that are not urgent, but they're really important to you. the things that are important are the things that you should really prioritize. And these are things like strategic planning, thinking ahead on the future, moving forward with important projects that you care about. And then things that are urgent and important. These are like real life deadlines that are associated to your survival, or things that are important for your family. That, is kind of key. But again, it varies. If you're dealing with PTSD, if you're dealing with any kind of trauma, your triaging mechanism needs to become a bit more sophisticated, and you have to include other factors like resourcing yourself, like how resourced am I for these various things that I'm looking at. Also with couples, it's what are the triggers within the relationship that are happening. Like if I'm more triggered than normal, like what is it that is influencing me in managing this triage thing that has just come in? I'm trying to triage whilst I'm triggered. So it's also managing your triggers in the mix. So it can get a little bit complex in terms of how we emotionally reason our way out of a stress situation. The other thing is also, I think, really just a key thing is to become a bit more proactive instead of reactive. So it's like thinking about, can I plan something? Can I automate something? Can I collate or pull things together? And can I eliminate the temptations that just actually take me out of the game? Can I simplify everything and get proactive? Because the more proactive we are, the less we're in the ocean getting drowned by every single wave that's crashing over us.
And I guess those are all really key points. And I'm curious around, like, even my own experience of being in that, like, long-term stress and going, okay, I did lose some executive functioning from my frontal cortex because it was just, the stress was just so significant. And I do happen to have like a recommendation that I write things in my book now for the prioritizing and working out, like, what is my priority, what does need to be done, and I put dates by them, and I find that really helpful because it also helps my really strong management part. And the reason why I choose a pad, and the reason why I choose a beautiful pad, is that because I want to go to it and it gets me away from in front of the computer. Now, the other thing that I must do, and my husband does do, is that when he's doing his writing and his research, he doesn't actually have his Outlook on. It's completely shut down, and he checks it in the morning, and then he checks it at the end of the day, rather than having like this constant bombardment. Like, our brains are not wired to have this constant bombardment of information and data, which we have now with IT technology, right? So yeah, it's a, and then I think that moves quite nicely for some people. Getting to that point is really tricky, isn't it? So then we might look at self-study. And I know that we love Hakomi. We both practice Hakomi psychotherapy. And it's not to solve your problems, but it's for you to, we help facilitate you look at yourself from an observer's perspective of self, to study some of the things that might be blocking you moving forward and getting out of this chronic state. Because sometimes we can be addicted to stress, right? We can be addicted to cortisol. We can be addicted to adrenaline and noradrenaline. We can be addicted to melatonin. We can be addicted to serotonin. Like, this is fact, right? But I want to talk about the sensitivity cycle.
Yeah.
Because it's just so lovely and it's just so beautiful. And I wondered if you might just go through that again with us. We touched on it last week, but it's so, I just think it's so powerful.
Yeah, so it's a model for high performance and productivity, and it's kind of, it moves through the seasons of the beginning, middle, and ending of something, and what the appropriate reactions for us to be our most productive should be if we want to move into that high performance type cycle. So the first stage is to get clarity, have some insights. What is it that I'm trying to achieve, to calculate effective action and figure out what I need to do next. And the next stage after that is effective action. So it's like, okay, well, now I'm actually doing stuff. I'm actually getting there. And then perhaps I'm gathering resources and people who are going to help me out or support that, but we're doing stuff to kind of get things done. Then there must be a period of satisfaction, like looking back and going, yeah, all right, well, that was effective. We did a good job. I feel satisfied of and nourished with what happened.
Yep.
And then the final stage is, completion, the ability to actually stop and rest and reflect so that we actually have the ability to take clarity again. Now, when we're highly stressed, we get to the barriers of the sensitivity cycle. We lose sensitivity.
Yeah.
We actually become blocked off, emotionally kind of dead, and we lose that sensitivity because we're stuck at a barrier. So we can't get insight. So we're stuck at the insight barrier. We just can't move forward. The next could be we're stuck at the response barrier. I don't know how to respond. I'm either procrastinating or I'm blocked or I just don't know what to do and I'm angry and it's, I don't know what the next steps are. Then after effective action, we kind of get stuck there and we don't want to feel satisfied. We're at the nourishment barriers. We can't take in the nourishment of, look what I achieved. We just can't take it in. And then in that final stage is the completion barrier. I can't rest. I can't reflect. And if we're stuck at any of these barriers, it really, it can be a real, it can exacerbate your stress symptoms because you're also now frustrated at this thing that you're trying to get done. You can't get it done because you're stuck at one of the barriers. And this is not something you can always acknowledge yourself. Like sometimes to see that you're at a barrier is done with somebody else to actually distinguish exactly where are you and what's going on.
Yeah.
It often feels a particular way within the body. So it's a sensory motor sensation. It's not something that we are cognizantly aware of unless you've had all the training where I'm like, I virtually live at the nourishment and completion barriers. I'm always never happy with what I've done and can never rest and relax, but always have insight and always busy with lots of effective action. But, it's kind of, unless you have done the work, it's tricky.
Yes. And there's certain, I guess, character types as well, like the perfectionist. The industrious and over-focused type person would be stuck at the completion and nourishment barrier. So you can dance around these barriers and sensitivity cycle based on how you've organized yourself as a child. So by the time you're 7, 10 years old, you have organized how you're going to be in the world. Like, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
In that sense,
really
barriers that you're going to come up against, like, wow, it's amazing. And I guess that would be the same for animals, like based on their environment and what they've been exposed to in their experience, like they organize themselves accordingly as well. Like all living species organize themselves in a certain way based on their experience. So yeah, and that's the fourth pillar, I guess. That's the environment, isn't it? This is just flowing so beautifully just by organically talking. But like, what is the cause of your stress? Like, what is your work? What is it that's happening at work that's causing you stress? Is it the work? Is it the people at work? Is it the culture at work? What is the health of your relationships, your significant relationships? Are they robust? Are they sensitive like you want them to be? Are they chaotic? Are they hostile? Like, what is the cause of your stress? And that's like pinning in quite nicely to a lot of how we are in the world is unconscious behavior. And sometimes we're not even conscious of why we're stressed.
But what's sad, Sam, and I'm sure you see this in your clinical practice as well, is we deceive ourselves. So I've had so many clients over the years. They come and they're like, well, it's work that's stressing me out. And then when you're actually digging underneath, it's their relationship.
Yeah.
And it's actually something they're not honest to themselves about. They're not honest with their spouse. They're not honest with anybody. It's this like secret that they're holding.
Yes.
So it's really important when you are assessing what is stressing you out to tell the truth, at least to yourself, admit to yourself. And maybe even by using your kind of HRV monitoring device, it's like work out after an argument, how am I feeling? After an interaction with somebody or there's something that's really bothering me, like under the surface, and I'm not talking about it because 80% of the time, it is our interpersonal relationships that are causing these stresses.
Yes, that is right.
It's not just work deadlines and whatever. No, it's Sally at work, and it's my husband, and it's this person, and it's this issue. I'm triggered by this human. It's usually an interpersonal relationship that is fueling this.
Yeah, and also how you might be impacted as well by watching somebody at work or watching a loved one or significant other be in stress as well. So it might not be your intrinsic stress. It might be that you're observing it for somebody else and noticing that actually it's not my stress, it's somebody else's. And that in itself can be like, oh, really? That can kind of soften it back a bit too. So yeah, it's really interesting. And you can be in therapy for years and not disclose what's actually causing your stress.
Mm.
You do see it. You see it in your own clinic that you go, wow, it can be quite obvious to you as the practitioner / therapist, but it's not your role, particularly in the Hakomi principles, to put your agenda on it or your lens of it. That's got to come from self-study of the person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And with that, I suppose we close this episode and look forward to the next one, where we will be talking about trauma and PTSD and what it all is and what it's about and what are some of the treatments associated to it, and again, how that affects us health-wise, relationship-wise, just some of the factors associated to that. So yes, we'll continue the musing of all things health, trauma, and relationships.
Yeah, great. Look forward to it. Until
next time.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. The information shared on the Naked Insights podcast is for educational and information purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. While we aim to provide helpful and accurate insights, individual experiences may vary. If you're experiencing trauma, mental health issues, or distress, please seek guidance from a qualified professional. The views expressed by us as the hosts are our own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any affiliated organizations.